my coordinator has to be an expert. And we even discussed this today. I told the coordinator, I said, look, it's our job to distill this and make this as easy as possible for our vendors. Well, if those one or two decide not to do it, you gotta go out of your way to find your next vendor. Like, it's almost more difficult to train someone to be outgoing and persuasive than it is to train them on how to be a technician when it comes to detail oriented. So that's where I get to kind of work on my operational muscle and my attention to detail muscle. But then getting people to be compliant is where the persuasive stuff comes in. Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching and listening. If you choose to listen on the podcast, you miss out on the Cold Summer shirt. So these are the ones that I brought to save our sites. And this was before tariffs came into play. Now there was actually like a foreshadowing of, like, it looks like right now we might be flirting with a recession. Like we definitely were after Trump's initial tariffs announcement where he kind of went nuclear and placed tariffs on everyone, including islands with penguins in them. But there might be a recession, there might not be. Eventually recessions happen, downturns happen, but we're breaking things down to first principles. I wrote an article on LinkedIn about the four virtues of sites. Like if you distill what sites want down to their four key elements, or what I call first principles, it would be business development, which we did a podcast last time on the attributes of a great business development person for a site. And then just to go really quickly through the rest, it's patient recruitment is number 2. It's contracts and budgets is number 3. And then it's site operations number 4. So kind of all encompassing all of these is a more macro overview or a meta analysis maybe of what a coordinator should be. Because in my opinion, a study coordinator, a clinical research coordinator, does all these things. Maybe the exception is contracts and budgets, although people like Monica Quitiva, who used to be a coordinator of mine, she went on to be a site owner of her own, were curious about contracts and budgets and wanted to learn how to do it while being a coordinator. So it's not unheard of for coordinators to even get involved in that aspect of contracts and budgets. But the point is, in my opinion, coordinators are generalists, and I know not every site treats them that way, but that's a strong philosophy of mine, is bring up your coordinators to be generalists. And I think if you are somebody looking for a career to be a coordinator, you should look for a company that's going to allow you to become a generalist. You're going to be dealing with these 4 principles that I mentioned in the article and mentioned here on the podcast. So what attributes make a good clinical research coordinator? And there's a lot. This is actually somewhat complicated. It's clearly nuanced. There's no such thing as the perfect coordinator, but in my opinion, it's kind of like you want the best of both worlds. You want somebody who's detail oriented, but also possibly an extrovert if you can. Those two things don't usually go hand in hand. And you can certainly be a great coordinator even by being an introvert, but you need to have moments where you are willing to be outgoing and be an extrovert. You need to, so let's unpack that one first, and then we'll get into the other attributes. So detail oriented, I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The coordinator is the one at the site, should be the most knowledgeable person at the site level on their particular protocol for their studies. Like, I know the textbook answer is the PIs, because they are the ones responsible. Like, it's logical that they should be, but no. PIs are physicians. They're busy. They're busy treating patients. They don't have the time, nor do they want to get into the nitty-gritty on all the details of the protocols. For example, I'm working on a study right now. We're in study startup and we're in crunch time right now. And I'm the site director, but me and my two coordinators are scrambling trying to get one of our vendors, which is an MRI vendor, to do their training. And there's actually a lot of procedures for this particular vendor as opposed to just standard of care MRI, which at the end of the day, that is what we are collecting. But because of the nature of these studies, there's all these technical requirements needed, and you have to follow certain steps in order how to acquire the image and what resolution and exactly what quadrants of the body. I mean, it goes into great detail. My coordinator has to be an expert, and we even discussed this today. She said the only one who really understands this particular aspect would be the MRI technician. But because the MRI technician could care less really about our study, I mean, they'll do it when it's time to actually acquire the image. But as far as all these technical requirements that the sponsor wants, it's not part of their day-to-day workings. So they just kind of expect us to walk them through this. And this is like these protocols for the vendors are written in such language that you have to be a technician to understand what you're reading. So I told the coordinator, I said, look, it's our job to distill this and make this as easy as possible for our vendors. I wish it was not the case, but that's part of the nature of being a coordinator is you have to kind of do this work for them. You're becoming a generalist. Like you're learning MRI technician detail, even if you may not retain it because you're going to move from that task to something else on the same day. But you're getting into the weeds with specialists, but you remain a generalist. And so that's just one example of the requirements for attention to detail. And there's a lot more. You have to be really diligent. There's studies, like at our site, we do multi-therapeutic studies. So the same coordinator might be doing obesity studies, might be doing a depression study, might be doing a respiratory study, and might be doing a heart failure study, like at the same time. That's an incredible amount of generalist knowledge that is needed while simultaneously being a technician as far as the details, the specific details of those therapeutic areas. And again, not every site is multi-therapeutic. Not every site treats their coordinators as specialists. It is natural as your clinic gets bigger that you get more streamlined. It is in the best interest of the site owner for standardization to take place and centralization to take place when possible. And I could totally see how a small site can evolve into a medium to large size site by getting departments, because that's the simplest way to ensure that there's not going to be issues, because there's when you're relying on generalist, there's more room for error, because the generalist by the very definition is somebody who kind of knows a lot or knows just enough about a lot of topics, whereas a specialist knows a lot about a small amount of topics. And you almost want to be the perfect coordinator, the ability to do both and the ability to simultaneously switch back from one to the other in the same day, in the same study maybe. And you're really, as a coordinator, holding everyone's hand, whether it's a vendor, whether it's your PI, whether it's your sub-Is, whether it's your team members, on the protocol. And you're the one that the sponsor is going to call when there's issues, because they would love to talk to the PI, but usually that's wishful thinking unless they can get the PI at a monitoring visit. It's generally going to be the coordinator putting out fires. And so you want this attention to detail, but you also want the ability to be outgoing, extrovert, sales mentality type of thing, not just for the obvious, which is the second virtue of patient recruitment, but even to convince vendors to work with you. Like in a community like Yuma, there's not much choice for imaging vendors. Like you have maybe a few, and not everyone wants to do it with you. So then you really only have like one or two. Well, if those one or two decide not to do it, you got to go out of your way to find your next vendor. Like for us, a backup vendor for us would be a 40-minute drive from here in another county, and actually in another state. That would be in Imperial, California, which we probably are going to do anyways, because I think having a diversification of vendors is important for a site. But that's a topic for another podcast. So the coordinator, the site director, which is me in this case, oftentimes will delegate to the coordinator, hey, we're having some issues with our vendor, or maybe this vendor's slower than we would like. We need to have backup vendors available. Here's 2 vendors that one of my colleagues said are worth reaching out to. I need you to talk to them and explain what we need and schedule a meeting for me to go down there and meet in person. And so now the coordinator, what they just learned as far as the MRI technical stuff, the very detailed stuff, detail oriented, they have to put on their influence cap or their extrovert cap or their salesmanship cap and talk to the vendor, the new vendor, about the study and make it presented in a way that they are inclined to want to learn more. And it's very difficult to find that trait in an individual that is able to shift gears like that from detail oriented to outgoing and persuasive. I see it in some of my own staff, and I think we have very good, well-rounded staff. In others, I see this as like an impossible transition. And I think it's important, if you're an individual or you're a site owner, that you consider this thing. Like, what kind of personality is required to be a coordinator? And it's almost more difficult to train someone to be outgoing and persuasive than it is to train them on how to be a technician when it comes to detail oriented. Some people have both, and definitely I think the majority of people have the potential to do well at both. But there are some people where you just talk to them, maybe in an interview. I do this all the time in job interviews with potential coordinators. I'm assessing simultaneously all these things. And there's some people you talk to them and you know this person, very detail oriented, but is going to struggle significantly when it comes to communications externally or being persuasive or dealing with the community or with vendors or whatever. Now, it doesn't mean they're not hireable, because there's a lot of value in being detail oriented. But if you can do both, that's excellent. You will be employable for life if you can do those two things right there. And that persuasiveness is also important, not just to deal with the vendors, but to deal with patients. So who's dealing with study participants more than anyone else? It's the study coordinator. And so this is another example, probably an even more important reason, is the coordinator not only have to be detail oriented and know the protocol well, you have to know that protocol inside and out, but you got to be persuasive, outgoing, charismatic, empathetic when it comes to patients, have good bedside manner, be willing to listen, be be a pleasant person. I know that should be like a obvious statement to make, but you'd be amazed how many people excel at detail-oriented activities and are just either not pleasant people or very awkward people or don't have good patient interactions or just good interpersonal skills and manners. Now, I think that can be taught, but I think it's easier to teach details as opposed to teaching this. And there are some exceptions, like the fresh out of college or fresh out of MA school, younger, maybe this is my first job I've ever had, coordinator type. That's something they can grow into. But when you're dealing with somebody who's had multiple jobs and still doesn't have that skill or that attribute, it's a sign that they're probably not going to get that. And there's a reason for it. So as a hiring manager, or maybe as the candidate yourself, you should consider these things. And there's courses you can take. There's Dale Carnegie course on the guy who wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People. There's even an argument that in a world where AI becomes more important or more prominent and more embedded in our day-to-day jobs, there's an argument to be made, and I think I would subscribe to this argument, that it's more important for a human to have empathy and influence and persuasion than it is to have detail-oriented proclivities. And that's just something that I don't think AI is capable of, at least anytime soon. Reaching out to patients. How do you convince a patient that they should come to their study visit even though they don't feel like coming in today? Well, Mr. Smith, if you don't come in today, you're out of window. And I know that doesn't mean much to you, but I get in trouble and we're going to have a hard time keeping you in the study. So I would really appreciate if you can come in and let me know what I can do to make it so that it's not as painful for you to come in today. Do you need a ride? Do you want me to bring you lunch? What do you want? And I will do it. These are some elements of being persuasive. Same thing when a patient or a patient's family wants to think about doing the trial. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually you're following good clinical practice. But oftentimes when a patient says, I want to think about this, that's code for they're afraid. And an empathetic person is going to pick up on that while respecting their rights to think about it. They will preemptively let the patients know, are there any fears or trepidations about doing this particular trial? Or not even ask, just bring it up. I know a lot of patients think this might be weird at first, but once they're in, they have pretty good experiences. We treat you like a VIP here. We'll give you transportation. We'll accommodate you. We'll bend over backwards to make sure that you have a good experience. It's part of our mission statement and all this stuff. So it's a special person that can do both detail-oriented and empathetic, persuasive, charismatic, whatever that emotional intelligence may be. IQ, which is intelligence, like technical intelligence, and then emotional intelligence, EQ. And so patient interaction, patient recruitment, patient retention, it's super important that a coordinator has that characteristic. Now we get back to the analytical side when it comes to contracts and budgets. You kind of need both again. You need that persuasion and you need that technical know-how and attention to detail. When you're negotiating a contract or a budget, Chris does this really well, actually. Chris Sauber, who used to be my employee as a coordinator, and then he became a site director, he's naturally inclined on the analytical side. Like, he's definitely more cerebral. He is super analytical. He's a numbers guy. that came naturally to him. He was a computer science major. The emotional stuff, like the EQ, I've watched him evolve over the decade and a half. He always had elements of it, but I've watched him just completely grow into that side. And I don't know if I rubbed off on him or whatever, but I think he understood without me having to tell him anything. You're going to accomplish a lot more if you can get the EQ aspect down as well. And everyone has their inclinations. I think he still skews more analytical, whereas I skew more emotional and persuasive or salesy. But I can go both ways too. Like, I started out as a coordinator. To me, what came natural was human interaction. Like, if the patient's not feeling well, that's like where I shine. I could come through and I could use the EQ and use the empathy to work to my advantage, my site's advantage, the study's advantage, and even the patient's advantage. And I had to work on the detail side. And even now I've probably skewed too far over on the EQ side. And I need to discipline myself to get more analytical at times, because as a business owner, I've been outsourcing a lot of the analytical stuff, like contracts and budgets. I outsourced it to Chris. One thing that I still like to keep my hands on are the operational stuff. So maybe not getting in the weeds on the study details, but getting in the weeds on the inner workings of who does what at the site and how they do it and when they do it and how that kind of works. So that's where I get to kind of work on my operational muscle and my attention to detail muscle. And I find when I practice that enough, this is why I still like to stay in the trenches. And even though I can do most of my job from home, work from home, I have to go in the office at least once or twice a week to stay in the trenches, see what's really happening, get the pulse of what's going on, but also see like the details. Like today I had to learn about the process we need to collect MRI images on a study. I don't love doing that. I actually didn't like it much, but I got in the weeds so I could try to solve that problem, try to reverse engineer what we need so we can have a successful study. And so I got my coordinator hat on and tried to figure that out today. So I think being able to shift and transition, almost like a quantum entanglement, right? Or like the ability to be a 1 and a 0 at the same time. Like quantum computing is not a 1 or a 0, that's binary, but kind of be both. And then when the situation calls for whichever outcome, you become that. And I think there's something here for everybody, whether you're a site owner or an employee or a candidate. There's always room to work. There's always room to get better, because I think the ability to shift is critical. And that's how you stay relevant as a generalist. So the last one of the 4 virtues is so just to go back on the contracts really quick. So you gotta obviously know things like fair market value. You got to get in the weeds and know every single assessment, what it's going to cost, and where your site's going to actually make money, where your site's going to lose money on the screen fail ratios. I mean, you're getting in the weeds. What things cost you, what a dry ice costs you, all that kind of stuff you got to figure out. What's your profit margin? But you also have to be able to effectively communicate this to the sponsor or whomever you're negotiating with. Because on their end, that's all they do. These contract and budget people at sponsors and CROs, they're specialists. So you're going from being a generalist where you're doing all these other things to now you got to play their game, and they're equipped with rebuttals for everything you're going to bring up, objections. So then you got to come back with persuasion, influence, empathy. There's an old saying in this industry, if you can justify it and you have a convincing or a compelling justification, you'll get approval for it. But the problem is most people don't put enough thought into What's the rationale for what they're asking? And from the perspective of the sponsor. So once you figure that out and put yourself in their shoes, it'll go a long way as far as your persuasion and your influence. And that's kind of one of the core themes of Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and also Robert Cialdini's book called Influence. So those are 2 books you should pick up if you want to improve on your persuasive skill set. Finally, and I touched on it a little bit, operations. So operations is everything from what technology you use, how you stack them up, how you monitor workflow, how you monitor workflow at the site level, how you monitor workflow at the study level, and how you monitor workflow at the visit level. So those are the 3 kind of abstractions. If you want to make abstractions for your workflow, it's visit level. What do you do? So every visit one should be like this. At the study level, so how are you figuring out workflow, who's doing what at and when? That's at the study level. And then at the site level, how do you share responsibilities? Who's delegated to do what? Where are the pain points? Where are the areas of failure? Those are the operational stuff. And then within that is a whole lot of stuff, like what eSource vendor do you use? What CTMS vendor do you use? What recruitment vendor do you use? What's your quality assurance process? What's your standard operating procedures? Those are all very analytical stuff. But then getting people to be compliant is where the persuasive stuff comes in. So this is where you're constantly going from IQ to EQ and back, from detail-oriented to persuasive, back to detail-oriented analytical, back to influential and charismatic, back to let's get in the weeds here and figure out problems, how to solve them, to empathy and let me put myself in the other person's shoes. You're constantly going back and forth across these 4 pillars of what sites really want. So as a coordinator, those are the skill sets, what you're looking for. Those are the traits. There's obviously macro and maybe meta traits. So attention to detail, but also adaptability, but also persuasive, but also understanding of therapeutic areas, but also being willing to learn new things and taking correction well and having great interpersonal skills, but also understanding medications. And there's a lot that you need as a coordinator. But if you distill it to first principles and the raw ingredients, you need to effectively switch between intellectual and analytical to persuasive and influential. And in a nutshell, that means adaptability. And that's what I look for when I hire coordinators. That's what, even if it's not always all the way there, it's rare where you'll get a candidate where you can see that right away, but you at least can see some raw ingredients for some of this. And I like to see the raw ingredients on both sides. This person, I feel like they would be fine with the details, but also they seem to have something about them that shows that they're adaptable and they're open and that they're engaging and they have good communication skills. So that's what I look for in a coordinator. That's what I think the best traits are for the best coordinators. And that's how you become a generalist, is by accumulating and abstracting specialist skills while integrating them all. So you're doing some calculus here while integrating them all with empathy and emotional intelligence. Sounds a lot easier than it is. I know. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try to attain that and instill that in our staff or in ourselves. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Let me know your thoughts on this. Bye-bye. hey, if you guys like that kind of content, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. Stay tuned for more videos.